Honourable John Banks.
What a sad and pathetic rank for so early in the morning from the ex-leader of the Labour Party. I remember the late Bill Rowling. When he was hurfed out of the leadership of the Labour Party, he never carried on like that, did he, colleagues? He was a good man, a statesman, not like we've heard from the member for Mount Roskill. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the third reading of the State Sector Amendment Bill. These bills were formerly titled the State Sector and Public Finance Reform Bill, and these bills make progress towards a more innovative, efficient public sector that delivers better results for New Zealanders. It's crucial for improving the services provided by the government. And I want to pay credit to my benchmate, the Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman, for his work on these bills and the work of the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. To illustrate the needs for these bills, I want to highlight just one of the changes made by this legislation relating to the responsibilities of departmental chief executives. And this coalition government, this National Party Act coalition government, talks about responsibilities of chief executives quite a lot in this bill. In particular, the bill will make explicit the stewardship responsibles of chief executives on behalf of the government representing the people of New Zealand. In ordinary use, a steward is someone who is responsible for managing property on behalf of someone else. In a state sector context, this means on behalf of the taxpayers and the citizens of New Zealand. While chief executives have for a long time been responsible for managing the organisational health and capability of their departments, this bill makes it clear that this requires proactive planning and management of the medium and long-term interest. This is to ensure that departmental maintenance and the ability to effectively serve successive governments. So this is intergenerational legislation in the best interests of value for money on behalf of the taxpayers. As Minister of Regulatory Reform, I'm pleased to see the bill also extends the duty of stewardship to legislation that departments administer. While ministers hold the key decision rights over legislation and legislative change, they are not well placed to proactively monitor and manage the performance of legislation over time and determine whether it remains fit for purpose. So the ACT Party and the people of Epsom believe that for far too long, acts and regulations are a result of undue haste, poor quality processes and inadequate scrutiny. Our statute books get bigger and bigger every year. Hard-pressed taxpayers who produce the wealth of New Zealand face a thicket of rules. Businesses tell the government that they're told, and had told the previous one, that reducing regulatory burden is what they want. The small businesses that I represent on Broadway Newmarket and around the Epsom electorate have said for far too long we've had the government on our backs and in our pockets too deeply. Well, I've got good news for hard-pressed taxpayers in New Zealand business. These bills take a small step to improving the regulatory burden on New Zealanders. They create the obligation for ongoing stewardship of existing legislation and regulatory regime. Regulation should be an asset to New Zealand, providing benefits that outweigh the cost to the users and the burdens that arise. But unless a department is actively and systemically monitoring performance of the regulatory regimes they administer, then they will not know if they're performing as assets or if they've become liabilities. Mr. Speaker, I agree and I respectfully disagree with his views on the Act's Regulatory Reform Bill and the argument for another day. That is the late George Tanner QC, a former Law Commissioner and Chief Parliamentary Counsel. He said the lack of any systemic process for post-enactment scrutiny means that the routine maintenance of some very major pieces of legislation rarely happens. The routine maintenance of any legislation regularly does not happen. So we paint our houses and service our cars, but we don't look after the laws that affect people's lives, more importantly, and this bill addresses some of that. The explicit stewardship role in these bills in relation to legislation is an important first step towards ensuring the scrutiny and maintenance takes place. Indeed, the government has already moved to outline its expectations for departments on their stewardship responsibilities for regulation. This is not exciting stuff, Mr. Chairman. It doesn't get the House in raptures, but it's important for the end users who are the taxpayers who fund all the activities of this government. The government expects that departments, that's government departments, will be actively monitoring the regimes they administer to ensure they are performing as expected. Where this is not the case, departments should be advising the government where changes could be made to improve regulatory reform and regulatory performance. Regulatory stewardship is about ensuring that the government departments do not have a set and forget mindset when it comes to regulation. Rather, departments, that's government departments, must be actively managing the regimes they're responsible for. Now, the ACT Party would say departments need to get better with the pruning and thinning of their regulatory forest. Removing the dead wood is good and necessary. When these bills are passed, the government will be monitoring departments' progress on meeting its regulatory stewardship expectations, and as Minister of Regulatory Reform, I'll have oversight for that and be watching it very closely. Strong regulatory stewardship will ensure that New Zealand's regulatory regimes are best placed to support growth in the economy. That is investment, growth and jobs, and we'll hear a lot more about that later today, Mr. Speaker. Strong stewardship is crucial to improving the performance of the state sector. So our aim should be clear in law, and it starts here today, this morning in this Parliament. Clearly understood, frequently checked for fitness for purpose, and occasionally pruned. These bills are small but meaningful steps towards our objectives. In this government, this coalition National Party ACT government, it says the taxpayers know all. The taxpayers we are responsible to. We are servants of the taxpayers. We must make sure that any laws passed in this Parliament represent their best interests and value for money for them. That's why, Mr. Speaker, of course, as Minister of Regulatory Reform, I support these bills.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I acknowledge the Minister